Pinnacle Peak Recovery presents Facing Addiction Podcast.
We have a whole generation that we've lost to fentanyl. Just last year, 100,000 people.
You know, even though I didn't want to believe that it was happening or
to respond in healthier ways so that we could give them the best chance that we could.
Hey guys, this is Tyler Tisdale, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Peak Recovery. This season on our podcast, we're going to be focusing on boundaries and also harm reduction. I got a very special guest with us, Kim Humphreys. He's the CEO of HowPAL. Kim?
Yeah, parents of addicted loved ones. Really appreciate you having me here today. Thank you.
Absolutely. So can you tell our guests a little bit about HowPAL?
Yeah, HowPAL was founded in 2006 by a substance abuse counselor by the name of Mike Speakman in the Phoenix area here at a treatment center. And he really saw the need for, dealing with families and particularly parents in a little bit different way. The relationship between a parent and a child has just a lot of different nuances that don't really translate to other relationships. And for example, if you're in a spousal relationship and somebody has an issue, well, you can always end a spousal relationship. Well, that never ends with a child. And plus you just have a special bond. And for lack of better terms or way of describing it, especially when I look back at myself, is that parents are very blind when it comes to what's going on with their kids. And it's really hard for you to see and believe that they would get involved in things that they shouldn't. So when he started this, it was really around that issue of, realizing that it's really difficult for parents to deal with a loved one, a child that has a substance use problem. And, when he started it here in the Phoenix area, there were the one meeting at the location there started to get some attention, and he just started to think I need to branch out, and he started a couple other meetings in the valley. And about 10 years ago, my wife and I were one of the people that went to that meeting, and we were there for a few months, and then he came to us and he said, hey, we got a lot of people at this meeting, and maybe you could start one on your side of town. And so we were like, well, we're not qualified to do a meeting. And he's like, no, you need to understand this is a peer-to-peer thing, and it needs to be people like you and your wife that are doing this. So we started a meeting. Well, in 2014, I retired from the Phoenix Police Department after 32 years. And to be honest with you, I was happy to be retired, and I'm happy to be retired now from that particular profession. It's tough times right now. But I remember it was in September of 14, and the same week that I retired, this individual, Mike Speakman, comes to me and he says, hey, I need your help. He goes, this is, this PAL is starting to grow here in the valley, and I'm 70 years old, and I need to, I'm writing a book on this, and I kind of need to retire, and I don't know what to do. I don't know how to handle this growth. And of course, I'm like, I just retired. Like, I'm ready to take a break. And he goes, yeah, that sounds like you got plenty of time on your hands then. And I'm like, but it had been such a lifesaver for my wife and I. And it wasn't hard to say yes to help. And just a short story of how that happened is over the course of the next about 4 or 5 months, he handed over all of the information about PAL. He basically gave PAL to a group of 12 parents. And we went and formed it as a nonprofit in early 2015. There were roughly a dozen or so meetings here in the valley. There had been one that had somehow started in another state. We weren't even sure how that happened. It was in Indiana. And after we filed it as a nonprofit, we got our website kind of straightened out. We started working on some materials. We had no budget. We were all volunteers. But flash forward, it's been 7 years, and now PAL is in, almost, I think, 40 states in the United States. We have people attending from our online meetings from 5 foreign countries. If it weren't for COVID, we would have been in every state in the United States. So just in this, short period of time, that happen. And we've gone from all volunteers to we finally had to get a staff, and so now I work there. We have a full-time staff that helps coordinate all these volunteers all over the country.
Wow. How many total members now?
So there's meetings in all these different states, and we have it's hard to say. We average about 8 to 10 people per meeting. So there's obviously thousands and thousands of people every single week that are meeting in these groups around the country. And of course, as you know, the issue with substance use has just gotten worse, and so the demand, honestly, for resources around that continues to go up. So we just have more and more requests coming in all the time to start meetings.
Wow. So I didn't know that it was a relatively new organization. When I went to the fundraiser for PAL, it was a great event. And I was telling everybody that, like, really powerful event. And I thought it had been around for a long time.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but it's just, it has just exploded. And honestly, I know we all talk about how COVID had an impact, but if you think about it, we were 100% in person, having meetings in like churches and locations like that. And immediately we couldn't do that, and so it just stopped everything. But the good news is that we really didn't lose anything during that time. We switched to online. We did a lot of things we could do to make that happen. Now we've gone back to, most of our meetings are back to in person, but we do see the need for having online meetings as well. So we have 4 national online meetings, and now we're starting what we call local online meetings, so that people that are attending those have the similar resources they can talk about in a community. But yeah, it just continues to grow. We actually were approached by the United States State Department this last year. They heard me talking at a conference, and they actually reached out to us and said that they would really like to see us expand into other countries that have this issue. And this particular part of the State Department, that's their job, is to find resources for other countries. But to be honest, it's tough. I mean, we got to figure out how to get everything dealt with in the United States, and we're certainly willing to do that. But it's been a fast and furious last few years.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And it takes time to build an infrastructure to scale it globally. I mean, I can imagine what that looks like. What's the difference from PAL and Al-Anon? Are you familiar with Al-Anon? Yeah,
so certainly the great things to say about any type of AA associated meeting. But the difference between PAL and those other organizations is that, 2 primary differences. The first is that we have an educational component. So at our meetings, you're going to go through a curriculum, and the curriculum is about addiction and recovery. And we have a number of lessons that we work through. We also allow for, things like guest speakers and things like that. But essentially, you're going to work through a curriculum and have a discussion about that. And then you're going to have an opportunity to have support from people that are going through this like you. And the primary difference, in addition to the curriculum, is that we allow crosstalk. So unlike at AA meetings, you can actually say, hey, my son just called me. He's, I know he's out there. He's actively, using and all that, but he says he just wants to come home for a little while, and everything's going to be better. And you can say to the group, what do you think? You think that's a good idea? Do you think I should let him come home? You guys have had experience with this. And then, of course, the group can start chiming in. And so if you want suggestions, they're there for you.
And are those suggestions more experience-based, like, hey, in my experience, this is what I did, or, hey, this is what you should do? Do you guys kind of coach around that at all?
Yeah, we really focus on the fact that we don't give advice. So it's like, this is my experience. This is what happened with me. This is what worked for me. But if you take that in conjunction with the curriculum, then you're going to realize, like, for example, we have a lesson on enabling, and we have lessons on healthy helping versus unhealthy helping. So when you start hearing the lesson and then you tie it in with people's experiences, well, you start to realize that, hey, there are some things that you can do if you choose to do them.
Awesome. So tell us how you got involved with PAL. You were there early on. Sounds like you have a personal experience there. Do you mind sharing with us?
Yeah, the reality, is that my wife and I have now been, coming on 39 years of being married.
Congrats.
And thank you. And it is, and it's wonderful. And the reason I share that is that a lot of times people are looking for some reason why somebody might be, go to substances or something like that. Well, in our case, there really isn't one. I mean, we had a very stable marriage. We had 2 sons, and frankly, it was ideal. And we just, we're raising them. We had a local church we belonged to. They were involved in that. They were did well in school. Everything was fine. And when our older son, Sean, was just around 15, we received a phone call, and I'll never forget, we were just sitting there in the evening, and the phone rings. My wife answers the phone, and there's a woman that says, you may not remember me, but I've met you at the school. And it turns out she had actually been a teacher earlier in Sean's grade school. And she says, but my daughter goes to school with Sean. And my wife said, yeah, and what's up? And she says, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but my daughter and her friends are very concerned that Sean is going to overdose. Okay, so we go from 0. I mean, he doesn't smoke cigarettes. He's not in trouble. He's doing fine in school. We don't know of any problem he has, to they think he's going to overdose.
Yeah, that's extreme.
Yeah, and we're like, well, why would you think that? And they said, well, we think he's taking pills, and we think that, he could have a real problem, and I'm really sorry to tell you this. Well, my wife, frankly, just said, you got the wrong house. It couldn't be. And she went back and forth with her for a couple minutes, and then finally she just said, well, okay, and she looked at me, she tells me this. And of course we immediately call Sean in the room, we're like, hey, this is what somebody just told us. We're very concerned. And he just looks at us and of course starts immediately with, well, you don't trust me? Of course I don't do that. Deny. And I said, okay, well, we're going to do a drug test. Why? You don't trust me? Well, I should have realized right then that was the answer to the question. And of course, by the time we got him to take a drug test, he came back positive for opioids. And even after that, he just kept after the fact that we must be making a mistake, the test is wrong, all of the above. And it was frustrating because, one, from a law enforcement background, you'd think I would have seen it coming. No. And then the second thing is that, like I said, we just didn't see any outward signs. And I think it's part of the issue when you're a parent. You just start coming up with excuses as to why their behavior is not exactly right, and you just don't really want to believe that would happen. But unfortunately, it was true. And, it was extremely difficult because we tried everything. I mean, we immediately got him to the doctor, and we tried to get him into counseling. We tried to get some help. And it turned out that, he had gone to a friend's house, somebody shared a pill and said, hey, you want to try it? And he tried it, and he was like, wow, that makes me feel, really good about my, and I'm like, that stuff makes me feel terrible. And I couldn't understand.
I've heard people say that, but I can't relate. But yeah.
Yeah, and he just kept saying that, and I was just like, I don't understand. And he says, after that day, he says, I could not have it. I had to have it again. And I just didn't understand that. And so, but we had a younger son. He's about 4 years younger, and he was doing really well. But in spite of the fact that, Sean just kept kind of having more and more difficulties, and as this continued on, it just got worse. And everything we did didn't help. And I'll be darned if after about 4 years or so, our younger son comes home from college. He's got 2 years in mechanical engineering, doing well, and he dropped out of school. And we're just like, well, what in the world happened? And the next thing you know, he's out there doing it too with his brother. And it was just, I mean, you talk about two parents who felt like we were the worst parents, on the planet. It just, it was just like, well, what did we do wrong? And you know what's really sad is how many people asked us that question. What do you think you did wrong? And I'm like, well, I guess everything, right? Because,
That's awful.
it was horrible. And we became reclusive, and we didn't want to be around people, and people we thought are friends, they didn't understand, and we couldn't talk to them. And if you did, they just thought, well, just tell them to stop, or, something like that. And we're like, you don't understand. We've tried everything. It doesn't work. And it was then that we found PAL. And, it was after we had been dealing with it for years when my wife finally was like, couldn't take it anymore. She was looking for something online and came across this little thing that said there was a little session and it was called PAL, and we decided to go. And to be honest, that was the first day when we got there that we realized we weren't alone.
What type of tools did you learn in the first few months of going that really helped you?
Well, I think the key, was when we were at those first meetings, and if I go back to those actual days of sitting there with my wife, I actually didn't say anything, and I listened for, I think it was about 6 weeks that we went, every week for 6 weeks, and I wasn't saying anything. I was just listening, and the facilitator, after 6 weeks, they got around to the sharing opportunity and looked at me, and he said, hey, he goes, did you have something you wanted to say? And I'm like, no. He goes, you've been sitting there for a long time and you never say anything. You sure you don't want to say something? No. I really think you have something to say. I'm going to give you one more chance. You want to say something? I said, yeah, you know what? I do. I said, I've been coming here for 6 weeks and I've been waiting for you to tell me how to fix my sons, and I haven't heard it. So when are you going to tell me that?
Oh, man.
And he didn't even bat an eye, and he looked at me and he says, oh, you're a fix-it guy, are you? And I go, well, I guess. He goes, are you good at it? I go, yeah, I guess so. He goes, do you do that work? And I go, yeah, I do that at work. He goes, well, here's the thing. You may be really good at fixing things, but you can't fix your sons. But we could work on you. And I'm like, but I don't have a problem. Right?
Yeah.
And I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, well, I don't have a problem, so why is he telling me that? And he says, no, I'm serious. He says, we can work on you. Would you like to do that? And I'm thinking, And I realized at that point that I do have a problem, and the problem, everything from codependency to just not really understanding how to relate to them, not even understanding how to accept, what was going on. And it was because of that I realized that, the power of what we were doing in PAL was helping us. It was helping us to be different, to be better people, to learn how to respond in healthier ways so that we could give them the best chance that we could. And that was the key, because once we started to change, that's when we started to see things in our sons change. And it didn't happen overnight, but that's when we learned, how can you do things in a healthy way? I know this sounds ridiculous, and most people would hear this and go, okay, well, that seems totally blatantly obvious. But, when somebody is an active user of substances and you give them cash, you can pretty much assume what's going to happen to the cash. And most people are going, well, of course you don't give them cash. And it's like, well, would you like to know what you do? Well, you'll say things like, well, I'll just give them gift cards. Well, gift cards are just the same thing as cash.
Yeah, they'll sell them.
You can pretty much do anything where you hand them anything that's of any value. Like, I remember one time my wife and I were determined that we weren't going to do this, and we decided, give them money. And so, because we knew what they did with it. So we went out, and at Christmas, we decided that we would give them, like new underwear and t-shirt and, socks and things like that. And later, my son told me 5 minutes after we handed him this stuff, he took it over to Buffalo Exchange and got like $10 cash for all the stuff we bought him. And I'm thinking, this is what we didn't understand, is that we just thought, we were helping, but we weren't helping. We were just contributing.
Right.
And that's the part where it was like, okay, we started to learn, we started to realize there's things we can do that are healthy, where, we want to be loving and we want to support, sobriety, recovery. We want them to get help, but we don't want to be contributing to the problem. And so, it was tough because then we had to set boundaries. And,
right.
And mostly the issue is the boundaries weren't about them. The boundaries were about us. It's like, what's acceptable to us and what's not. And when somebody's living in your home and they're destroying your entire lifestyle and, they're stealing things from your house and everything else, well, that's not okay, and you can't live like that for long, or you start to suffer significantly. So that's when we started to learn, we have had to learn how to set boundaries, allow them to grow up, allow them to make their own decisions, but also realize that there's consequences to our decisions in life, and that was hard because I didn't want to see them suffer. I didn't want to see them have any problems in their life. But honestly, that's probably why they never learned how to solve a problem, because they never had to. We did it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of parents, it's within their instinct to help the child. So what's the difference between helping and enabling at PAL, or in your experience?
Yeah, so enabling is doing something for somebody that they should be able to do for themselves. And helping is doing something for somebody that they can't do for themselves. So, is it appropriate to enable a child that's 5 or 6 years old? Answer, absolutely. Because they're 5 or 6 years old. So, it takes something as simple as, that they need to pay a bill. Well, a 5 or 6 year old doesn't know how to pay a bill. They can't pay bills. They don't even know what that means. But a 25-year-old, they're responsible for paying their own bills. They're responsible for doing that. Make a doctor's appointment. Okay, well, a 6-year-old can't make a doctor's appointment. I have to do that for them. I have to help them with that. A 25-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 40-year-old. We have people that are coming to our meetings that have 49 and 50 and 51-year-olds they're dealing with. And if I told you the story, you'd think I was talking about a 12-year-old. And the reality is that, yeah, people have a lot of opinions about it, and that's why we don't tell people what to do. We simply share our experiences, and if somebody wants a suggestion, they can get it. And what they're gonna hear from people consistently is that when you enable, when you do things for somebody that they should be doing for themselves, essentially you're robbing them of the self-esteem that they would get from solving their own problem. So it was shocking to me later when my sons were in their 20s and they didn't know how to do basic things that I just assumed, they would know how to do. And I used the example of making a doctor's appointment. I'll never forget, my younger son said he was in between, rounds of issues, and he was like, he wanted to go to the doctor. And he goes, well, how do I make an appointment? And I'm like, well, you pick up the phone and you call. And he had never done that. We always did it. And it was like, he just never even learned how to do that. And it was actually unfortunate that we had done that to him. And I think in today's world, we just don't realize, what is your job as a parent, and if you go back, I'll never forget, people may not remember Irma Bombeck, but, she was so famous for, her writing, and she was funny, and people just loved her, and she wrote one time that when she had her child and she took the baby home from the hospital, she put the baby in the crib And then she put a sign up over the crib, and the sign said, checkout time 18. And obviously the goal is to realize that your job as a parent is not to take care of them for the rest of their lives. It's to help them learn how to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. So at 18, they could spread their wings.
Yeah, get them to learn how to grow up and move out and become independent and, earn their own living and get a job. And, it's tough. And if you don't realize that's what your job is, and you think your job is to just, do everything for them, well, then when will they ever learn? And that's what's hard. And so that's the difference is I want to help my sons. I don't want to handicap them from being able to do the things that they should be able to do.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And so let's say I have a 22-year-old living at home, active in addiction. He's not really stealing, but he's definitely struggling, active in addiction, causing problems in my life, indirectly, but not stealing or anything directly to me. I'm letting him live at home rent free. What experience would you share there? Or what would I hear at PAL what have other people done to deal with that situation?
Yeah, it's a really good question because first of all, it comes up all the time. And, you're going to hear people's, experiences, over time, and they're going to be based on what's happened. And usually what they're going to hear is, well, how is it going? And they're like, well, it depends on their answer. He's really not causing any trouble. Well, does he work? No. Does he contribute to anything? Well, not really. Doesn't really clean up. He doesn't really want to do anything. I can't even get him to mow the yard. I can't do this again. Once in a while he'll do it, but then he won't do it, And so you'll just hear this and you'll go, okay, so do you consider this to be your goal is that this is the way he's going to be forever? Well, no, I want him to get help. Well, why isn't he getting help? Well, I don't know. He just doesn't want to go. He says he doesn't have a problem. But you think he has a problem. Why do you think he has a problem? Well, I've caught him in, using drugs, and I've seen this and I've seen that. Okay. So usually it's not about telling anybody what to do. It's they need to come to the conclusion that they're not helping. And the question to always ask yourself is, if you have a 22-year-old living at home and they don't have a job or they can't keep a job or they're not contributing, well, what's this going to look like in 10 years? What's it going to look like in 20 years? And I don't mean that to be facetious. We have people in our meetings, and we had a woman one time and her husband showed up and they said, oh, well, this is our first meeting and we just, we're really thankful to be here. Our son is having a really tough time and, he's, we didn't really like living with him. So we decided to get him an apartment. So we paid for an apartment and then he needed to get around. And so we got him a car and then he really can't get a job. And so we just deliver him groceries and stuff every week, and then we give him an allowance and all this. And I said, why can't he get a job? And they said, well, because he's on heroin. And I go, okay, so that's a choice, right? I mean, if he got help, then he could get a job. Well, yeah, but he doesn't want to get help. And I said, so let me get this straight. You rent him an apartment, you got him a car, you pay for his insurance, you pay for his gas, you bring him food, and he essentially lives for free in this place. Why would he want to change? And they're like, well, I never really thought of it that way. And they said, but we really don't know what to do because he tells us he can't do anything else. Well, the moral of this story, which is it's a 100% true exactly how it happened story is this young man was 59 years old. These people were in their 80s.
Wow.
So do you want to flash back 22, 23, 24? Do you want to be doing this in 30 years, 40 years? At what point are you going to realize that they have to learn how to be an adult? They need to learn how to live in life on life's terms without the use of mind-altering substances. And how are they going to do that if, well, frankly, Why would you change if everything's provided for you? Why would you want to do anything different if you can have everything that you want and do it that way? And I don't mean it to be mean. I mean, I think it's sad when you see something like that. And it's, you know, how somebody can even survive that long on these kinds of things, I don't know. Because he would just pop in and out of it. And now he's still doing it at 59. You know, I don't know. I realized, you know, after we tried doing it the other way, it didn't work. And we realized that, you know, if you're going to have somebody like that, it's time to set some boundaries. And boundaries would be like, what's acceptable in your house? Would you let anybody just live in your house for free? I mean, I think at the age of 22, it's time to say, okay, well, there's rent due. You don't have to tell them that they have to get a job. That's telling them how to live their life. Just tell them, this is what it costs to live here. Well, the obvious is if they can't get a job and they can't pay the rent, and then, by the way, there's some rules around the house, like, you know, you can't be using substances in our house because this is a drug-free home. So you're going to have to be subject to drug testing. Well, can you do that? Well, yeah, it's your house.
Yeah.
And by the way, you know, law enforcement background, just so people understand, you can be held responsible if they're bringing massive amounts of drugs into your house and it were caught. You, the homeowner. And so,
yeah, that's good to know.
It's tough, but it's a situation where, you know, I hope people understand there's no one answer, but what you learn is, what we learned is that you'll do it at your own pace. You'll take baby steps. And, you know, like with us, the very first thing we did, we didn't go to a PAL meeting and go, okay, well, we're not going to help them at all. We didn't do that. We went in and it took us months to even get the courage up to do one thing. And the first thing we did was we decided that we shouldn't be paying for their cell phone. Why would you be paying a 20-something-year-old cell phone bill? You know, well, we justified it because we had a plan and it was cheaper. Well, you know, we fretted over it, and then we decided, okay, here's what we're going to do. We went over to Cricket, we bought a phone, we got 1 month on it, and then we met with our older son, and we handed him the phone, and we said, you know what, we're really sorry that, you know, we have been doing this for you when you should be doing this for yourself. And you know what we've decided to do? We're taking you off of our plan, but hey, we got you a phone, and we got you a plan, and in 30 days, they're going to text you. And if you don't pay for it, well, then they'll turn it off. You know, and I honestly thought he was just going to kind of fall apart, you know, and I thought this was going to be a disaster. You know what he said? Okay. And I was like,
that was easy.
Oh, that wasn't that hard. Well, that was step one. That was one boundary.
Baby
right?
steps.
And
like
it was.
you said. Yeah.
And then eventually we realized that, you know, I don't want him to be reliant on me. I want to realize that our sons can grow up and be the men they're supposed to be without me.
I love that. So, yes, man, just so much good stuff here. And what I've heard from people, and this is, once again, it comes with the instincts of a parent. And I think a lot of people who haven't experienced this are commenting this stuff, and maybe with people with different points of views. But people say, well, if you kick them out of the house, they'll be on the street and they'll die. Like, you're killing them. And my thought is, there's no difference from the street and the home. Like, fentanyl is the exact same way, and that's what's killing most of these kids and adults. And so what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. I mean, first of all, you know, when a parent goes down the road of, well, at least if they're here, I think they're safe. And I'm like, well, come to the meeting for a little while, because we've had numerous individuals that have walked in and found, you know, their loved one has died in their home.
So sad.
And it's like, okay, so you want to experience that? And it's like, of course you don't. And the reality, you know, when it comes down to it is if somebody says they say this all the time, this is helping understand boundaries. They'll say things like, well, I don't want to make him homeless. I don't want to make her homeless. I could never kick her out because I would make them homeless. And it's like, okay, well, we got to start changing the whole thought process here. We got to change even how you say what you just said. And that's what we work on. So for example, you know, we sit down with a 20-something-year-old And what we recommend is if you are going to let them live in your home, that you have a contract. And the contract, we have them on our website at palgroup.org, and you can download this contract. And basically it's a, this is what will allow you to live here. And if you do this, then you can stay here. Well, first of all, you're subject to a drug test because it's a drug-free home. Okay. That's usually one of the things I recommend they do. Number two, if they're 20-something-year-old, they pay rent. If whatever it is that you feel is appropriate. That's just, I'm not saying we dictate anything. It's like you decide, what it is that you want. But then what you do is you have a consequence. So the consequence is if you violate whatever, here's the consequence. The consequence is usually we try and put it in layers. One, you'll go to a treatment program. So if you violate this and you come back up and you're positive on a drug test, then you agree to go into a treatment program. And if they say, well, I don't want to go into a treatment program, then B then you can't live in this home. Now notice, I didn't make you homeless. You made a choice and you decided, I don't want to do that. So therefore, basically, you made yourself homeless. Now, homeless is a relative term, because most of them will find friends and couches and things like that, at least for a while.
For a little while, yeah.
And then eventually that'll usually get worn out too. But you know what? I don't know what it's going to take to make them want to change. But I will never make my sons homeless. But I will set boundaries and say, you know what? I can't live this way.
And if you do set that boundary and they choose to not go to treatment and are homeless, I think for me, my belief, and I'm sure you guys are on the same page, is like, hey, I am here when you're ready to get help. Call me. Absolutely. It's not like you're just writing people off. It's like you're just setting that boundary and you're there for them to help them, but you're not there for them to enable them.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember sitting down with when we had finally couldn't have, like our older son live with us any longer. I mean, he destroyed our home. I mean, it was unbelievable what had started to happen. And so, I sat down with him one day because I know he was having a difficult time. And I said, listen, we will always be for you. We will never be against you. We love you. We care about you. We are for, and we will always be for sobriety and recovery. And when you are ready, we are here. And we will do whatever we can within that boundary to help you. So if you're ready to go, let us know. And then eventually it got to the point where, unfortunately he would take advantage of that and he would just call us to like give him a ride to some place and we'd be thinking he'd be going into treatment. And it was like, okay, he wouldn't. And then it would be like, all right, well, we're going to have to set another boundary. So we didn't start with, this hard line. It just sort of became more and more difficult to be able to do things. But the reality is if they choose to do that, we're always going to tell them, we're going to pray for them, that we love them, that we care about them, that we're there for them. We never ever tell people, that you should, quote, abandon them. But that doesn't mean that you're around them. Sometimes you have to set boundaries. Sometimes you have to do it for people's own good. Right. You have to do it for yourself. You could have a mental breakdown. You could have a complete, you could lose your health. We had people in our meetings where a couple was coming and they had been coming for a while and they were dealing with a daughter, and then about 3 or 4 weeks went by and we didn't see either one of them. And then a month goes by and the woman shows up at the meeting. We get around, we start talking to her and ask her how things are going. And she says, well, not well. My husband had a heart attack and he died. Jeez. And he's not, that old, and he had no precursors for all of this. And she says, and the doctor said it was the stress, that he was just under so much stress, and it just was overwhelming over time. And it's like sometimes you have to set boundaries to take care of yourself.
Once again, really appreciate you coming down here and doing the podcast, Kim. A lot of good nuggets here. tell us where to find PAL, how to get in contact, where the groups are, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so if you're looking for a PAL group or you know somebody that might be interested, if you just go to our website, which is palgroup.org, palgroup.org, and you can go on Find a Meeting and see if there's a local meeting. If there's not a local meeting, there might be a local online meeting, or we have national online meetings, and you can find those as well. We also have a lot of resources on there, so if people are interested, they can find information about, like what we talked about, like contracts and things like that. But to be honest with you, I think the key is surrounding yourself with other people. And as much as, I was kind of not the type of person that would want to go to this type of meeting. As a matter of fact, my wife had to actually kind of, keep talking to me and say, look, we can go. I just felt like we should be able to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And
you wanted to fix it.
I did. I wanted to fix it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. And I think when I finally accepted that was when I got to the point of realizing that, I had to open up my hands. And it's just like my sons. At some point, they had to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And by the grace of God, they've been in recovery now for, coming on like 8 years or so. Mm. And so we went from 10 years of this, not being able to deal with it and essentially, from overdoses and arrests and all the other things that go along with this stuff, multiple hospitalizations and numerous treatments and all of the above. And if you asked our sons today, what made the difference, they will tell you that it was the changes that we made that led to the changes that they made. Mm. And they will say that when we finally started setting boundaries, when we finally started, honestly, treating them like adults, allowing them to deal with life, the way they needed to without us being involved in it. And that's when they realized what they needed to do. And so today, hey, you know what? They have great jobs. They're homeowners. Mm-hmm. I don't pay their bills, so this is awesome. And
they don't have cricket, I assume.
They don't have cricket phones.
And I know your oldest son, Sean. I just want to tell everybody he's a great guy, and it's unbelievable hearing your stories because I just can't see it. But me being in recovery myself, I was a completely different person. So I totally get it and understand. But he's just a great person. And awesome job. Such a cool story.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And again, if people just go to the website, they can find information. And to be, to be honest and open about it, it was like I had to get to that point of realizing we needed help. And, and that finally that willingness to ask and that going. And then the most important thing was that, we decided to choose to do some things differently. Mm-hmm. It was easy to keep doing the things the same way, but as you know, we kept getting the same results and mm-hmm. it wasn't working. Mm-hmm. And somebody said at a meeting one time, they said, what if I told you that this might be the one thing that might save their lives? Would you be willing to do it? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I will do anything at this point to mm-hmm. save their lives. Mm-hmm. And that's when things started to change.
Wow. So if you're out there, you have a loved one who's struggling or a close friend, family member who's struggling, definitely reach out to PAL. Great organization. Really appreciate having you on. And thanks again.